Ready, set. There we go. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome aboard. We have another wonderful week with a fantastic Parshah and an exciting energy to be able to explore and discover practical, relevant life messages as the Torah directs us for a meaningful, purposeful, but a direction-filled life. We know we're heading in a great trajectory. We're headed to great destinations. And that's why we're learning Torah, so that we can know where we have to go and how to get there. This is what we want to discuss today. And with our three-step program, we're going to start off with what's going on in the Yiddish calendar this week. There's lots going on. Last week we already mentioned that we've started a month of Emor in which every single day of the month is filled with an additional mitzvah of counting. What are we counting? We're counting every single day. And every day is counted and therefore should be accounted for. And every day of the Emor is a day which we work on ourselves. And as we're going to actually explore in today's lesson, working on our own character is considered a primary goal in Yiddishkeit, especially the way Hasidic teachings teach us. So, of course, there are the behavioral aspects of our life, and that's a big part of what the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, teaches us. And that's behavioral matter, which is, of course, very important. But in addition to that, character. Not only what we do, but how we do it. Not only where we live, but how we live should also be a big part of our avodah, our service of Hashem. And that's what's taking place in a big part from the moment we're born. As we go through life, this is what we're doing. So every single day of the Sfiras Omer is important. And of course, counting days is supposed to be a lifelong message that encourages us, empowers us to be able to make every day special. So that's the month of Emor we're in. And last week, we also described how Emor is the Rosh Hashanah, is an acronym for the name Ani Hashem Refecha. Emor, Hashem tells us, I am God, your healer. Hashem heals us, and we all need a refuah in all different aspects. And this is, we turn to Hashem for refuah, for healing. It happens to be that this week, we are marking 1 month countdown to the Yom Tov of Shavuos. Today was Ches, but yesterday was Zayin, and it's a month to go to Shavuos. And traditionally, we know that before every festival, every Yom Tov, we learn the halachas of Yom Tov a month in advance. Famously, even when it came to Purim, the Rebbe described that we should be learning about the Yom Tov of Purim a month before, and this year was in a leap year, and therefore the Rebbe pointed out when it was from the first small Purim to the big Purim, but certainly Shavuos, there's already an energy building up for Shavuos, which is just under a month away now. Before we learn again next Monday, we will have on Sunday Pesach Sheni, a second Pesach, which you need to make a mention of already today, because Pesach Sheni, the second Pesach, of course, in itself, is a mitzvah, one of the 613 commandments. It's one of the mitzvahs that kind of highlight that you don't have to do every mitzvah every time. You always have to do every mitzvah that presents itself. For example, someone who did the first Pesach, not just the Seder night, but in the good old days, which we can't wait to have back, when they brought a carbon Pesach, a Pesach offering, and the Seder revolved around that Pesach lamb. So then they wouldn't do the mitzvah Pesach Sheni. You wouldn't bring the second Pesach offering, which is coming up this Sunday. But if someone, for whatever reason, missed, or a specific reason, missed the first Pesach because they were far away, they were not tahir, it was an unintentional drawback that did not allow them to bring the carbon Pesach, they would have the mitzvah to bring the Pesach Sheni 1 month later, on the 14th day of the month of Emor, which is going to be the Sunday. We would bring, and we would hope to bring, a second carbon Pesach, Pesach Sheni. Interestingly, Pesach Sheni was also eaten with matzah, but it didn't have to be in a whole Pesach cleaning operation. You could have chametz still in the house. Now that's Pesach Sheni, a second chance for those who missed out the first one. Fascinatingly, the Rebbeim teach us that a Pesach Sheni, a second opportunity. It sounds like a nice idea. It sounds like Hashem's being kind. But really, if we think about it, the creation of a second chance, the ability for someone who missed out the first opportunity to have a second chance is a miracle. It's a fascinating idea. Why should it work? Why should there be a second chance? Why, if we missed out, do we still have the ability to make up for it? And the answer has to be not because if you missed one time, then you get a second time. The reason why a second chance exists is because it's never too late. Second chance doesn't just mean number two, a second chance. Second chance means another chance. That although you missed it, it's not over. And therefore, if unfortunately someone needs a third chance and a fourth chance, the mitzvah is only a second time. But the message that it carries is that it's never too late as long as we're still alive, as long as Hashem gives us kech, and Hashem invests in us, then we have the opportunity to make up for as long as the candle's burning, we have makeup. No, it's a one-way trip. Sorry about that. If anyone wants to unmute himself on the phone, it's *6. On the computer, it's Alt-A, space bar, or just push the good old unmute button. Okay, so that's what's going on in this week. We have the month of Iyar. We have a build-up to Shavuos. And of course, we're gearing up for Pesach Sheni. On a personal note, this coming Shabbos is Shabbat in the Heights. We're spending a Shabbaton, a full-on, intense, immersive Shabbos in the heart of Chabad's heartbeat in Crown Heights in 770 Rebbe Shul. So personally, it's a very special week for me. And we hope and pray that this year, this Shabbos was happen for bringing the Rebbe himself, and we hear the Rebbe's voice again. And then we should be for bringing Yerushalayim HaKodesh in 770 in the Beis HaMikdash. Let's move on to what's in this week's Parsha. The title of this week's class is Do It Because It's the Right Thing to Do. Give selflessly, even if you get nothing of it. Where does this tie into the Parsha? And let's do a summary first. So this week's Parshah's Emor, is a Kohanim Parsha. It's a Parsha that the Kohanim need to learn. Why do the Kohanim need to learn it? Because the opening of this week's Parshah's Emor actually comes from the word Emor to say. Why is this week's Parsha called Emor? Because there's an obligation for the Daddy Kohen and the Grandpa Kohen to teach the child Kohen. And there's an obligation for the older generation to teach the younger generation the rules and regulations of being a Kohen. Fascinatingly, if you look around in the current statistics amongst Jewish people, Kohanim are much more common than Leviim, people from the tribe of Levi. Now, just to put that into context, you have 12 tribes of the Jewish people. One tribe, one of the 12, so 1/12 of the Jewish people, it wasn't a number-wise, but overall speaking, 1/12 of the tribes are the tribe of Levi, 1/13. Out of that one tribe of Shevet Levi, there was one family, that's Aaron, who him and his descendants became Kohanim. His brother was Moshe Rabbeinu, was a Levi. His cousins were all Leviim. So it's a very small percentage of the tribe of Levi that became Kohanim. Yet, if you look around, there are far more people who identify as Kohanim, who know them to be Kohanim, than Leviim. And of course, the reason for this is because, unfortunately, many of the responsibilities that the Kohanim had, and they have equally also the Leviim had, were specific to the times of the Beis HaMikdash, which we do not have yet today. And therefore, the way for a child to learn about what Kohanim means or what Leviim means, very much dependent on how much exposure they had to the mitzvahs that remain for a Kohen or a Levi. And as children grew up, they remembered the things they did and would later remind themselves, oh, we did this because we were a Kohen. Unfortunately, just a short while ago in our history, much of Yiddishkeit was overturned and thrown out of place in extreme exile again. And therefore, the tradition and the memories of young people, as they grew older, didn't necessarily retain all the different specialties that they had being a Levi. Kohen a bit more so, because the Kohen still retains a few more things that they had to do, even today, like blessing the people on Yom Tovim, and not coming in contact with those who have passed on, which is in this week's Sedra. And what we learn here in this week's Sedra is that there's an obligation for the parents to try and impart that and teach that to the children, the next generation, obviously that they are Kohanim, but what the rules of the Kohanim are. And today, it's really important for us to be able to treasure that sort of heritage. For those who are Kohanim, equally the Leviim would have do a great chesed to their children, to their families to teach that, and likewise with Yiddish people in general. So the opening of this week's Parshah's Emor speaks about the halachas that pertain particularly to Kohanim, and there was an extra set of rules that were particular to the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, who had even more stricter sets of halachas. What halachas do we have in this week's Sedra? We start off with learning the halachas of not coming in contact with someone who passed away, and that means not touching, not even attending a cemetery, or even going into the same roof or cover under which a dead body lies. And that includes all people who have passed away, with the exception of close family members. And there are 7 types of close family members. That would be a father, a mother, a brother, a son, a daughter, a spouse, and a sister before she gets married. There is also the restrictions of the regular Kohen. They cannot attend a funeral or go to the cemetery for anyone else other than those 7 close family connections. The Kohen Gadol cannot even attend the funeral of his own parents. No one. The high priest remains in the Beis Hamikdash. The only exception, the Kohen Gadol, and that would apply to anyone, including Kohanim, would be a Meis Mitzvah, if they are in a place where there's no one else, and they come across somebody who's passed away, who needs burial, a Meis Mitzvah, the Kohen Gadol will then waive what he wouldn't do for his own parents, he would do for somebody who's a stranger, who may not even know who it is, but requires burial and there's no one else around. Interesting set of halachas. That's the halachas that comes to somebody who's passed away. In life, there are also other mitzvahs and halachas. Who may the Kohen marry and who may the Kohen not marry? A Kohen may not marry a divorcee. A Kohen Gadol may also not marry a widow. The Kohen Gadol, the high priest. A regular Kohen can. Then we learn also the halachas of the Kohen. And when is a Kohen allowed to serve in the Beis Hamikdash? And when not? The Kohen may only be of service in the regular services of the Beis Hamikdash if he has not got a deformed body. Somebody who's a Baal Mum could do other jobs, but cannot be counted amongst the families that are doing the actual service. They can still eat the karbanos, and they can still eat from the holy meat. And equally, from there, the Torah segues straight into the other sorts of deformities that cannot be found in the Beis Hamikdash, and that is an animal that's missing a limb, an animal that's unhealthy, cannot be brought as a gift, as an offering to Hashem on the Mizbeach, on the altar. And we learn also, in addition to that, along the same ideas, we learn also with the halachas of an animal that's a newborn child. A newborn calf or a newborn lamb cannot yet be brought as an offering until it's 7 days old. And the Torah says it shall stay and remain with its mother for 7 days, and only afterwards can it be brought as an offering. And equally, the Torah also puts a restriction that one cannot offer an animal as a carbon on the same day as its offspring. So if it's a time of the year where a lot of people are bringing offerings and the farmer sells the mummy sheep to somebody to bring an offering, before he sells the lamb to somebody else to bring an offering, he has to let them know, by the way, so-and-so or somebody has bought the sheep today. You'd probably have to wait till tomorrow before you can use this lamb as an offering. And that's also in this week's Parshah. But that's only the beginning part of the Parshah. The entire rest of the Parshah, almost till the very end, deals with Yom Tov, Jewish holidays and festivals. What an uplifting Sedra. What a lively Parshah. It starts off with Shabbos, and when the karbonos, the offerings that had to be brought on Moedim of the Mered Shabbos, and from there it goes straight into Pesach, the Korban Pesach on the 14th day, and then all the Karbanos that were brought on all the rest of the days from the 15th days for 7 days of Pesach. From there, also lists out the Korban Emor, which was from the new harvest of the barley. And from the beginning of the Omer, we have the mitzvah in the 6th parasha to count every single day, which we just spoke about, the counting of the Omer for 49 days, which brings us straight into the next Yom Tov, the holiday and the festival of Shavuos, which would be another korban of the Shtei Lechem. And on the korban on the 50th day, we have Yom Tov of Shavuos. We then also read about the korbanos that were brought on the Rosh Hashanah with the mitzvah of blowing shofar from the Jewish New Year on the 1st of Tishrei. And from there, we learn about the halachas of fasting on Yom Kippur on the 10th day of the month. And then, of course, we have on the 15th day of the month, the mitzvah of living in a sukkah and taking the lulav and esrog, the 4 species. From there, we have straight into Shmini Atzeres, the 8th day of that Yom Tov, which is a Yom Tov into its own, the 8th day of Sukkot. And that's how the Parsha includes all the Yom Tovim. Now, fascinatingly, when you take out a Sefer Torah to read on Yom Tov, chances are, at least one of the days, we're going to be reading from this week's Parsha, Parshah's Emor. In the end of the Parsha, we learn about the Mishkan again, and we learn about the lighting of the menorah in the Mishkan, as well as leaving the breads, putting out the showbreads on the lechem apanim, on the shulchan, on the table that were there, and that's how the Parsha closes. So it's a loaded Parsha. It's a lively Parsha. It's a Parsha that gives message to the next generation. It gives us importance and reverence to the Kohanim, but also it's a Parsha that teaches us a lot about how to celebrate and the celebrations that come from Hashem. So it's a loaded Parsha. We're going to pick the exception in the Parsha, the part of the Parsha that seems to be out of place. And we're going to go back for a second, see if it's on that slide. It's not clear on the slide. We're going to be talking about, let's bring it up here. This is the pasuk we want to focus on. This pasuk, we're going to read it in English in a moment, is found right after the Torah tells us about the mitzvah of Shavuos. We're counting up to Shavuos. And Shavuos is the festival that we bring the ripened and the new produce as the Shtei Lechem, when the wheat is finally being harvested. We bring a korban on that Shavuos. Says the Torah, it's the festival of harvesting. However, when you harvest, there's a mitzvah. Let's read it inside. It says the pasuk, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not completely remove the corner of your field during your harvesting, and you shall not gather up the gleanings of your harvest. Rather, you shall leave these for the poor person and for the stranger. I am the Lord your God. There's a mitzvah not to gather the leftovers that were left behind when I harvested, and there's a mitzvah to not cut the entire field, instead to leave over a small portion at the end. The corner of the field shall be left, and who should take these leftovers? The poor. Poor person and the stranger, the one who doesn't have his own inheritance in his own real estate. Make sure that no one goes hungry. It's a great mitzvah. It's an important mitzvah to think about those who are less fortunate. And here's the question we're going to be discussing today: how that is found in today's modern society. Do people generally give charity today more, less, or equal to generations of old? Is there more charity going around or less charity going around? What would you say?
I would say it was equal.
Okay, equal. We've more or less given the same amounts of charity as people have always been giving. Interesting. Anyone want to agree or disagree? Anyone else weigh in on this? Add to this?
I'll tell you what I'm basing it on.
I'm listening.
I'm basing it on volunteering, right?
Interesting.
If you look at volunteering, no matter what group, it's always the same people.
Yes.
And they go from play group to primary school to senior school, and then they go to doing volunteering in the community. So, and I'm basing that humans basically don't change.
Hold on 1 second. Hold on 1 second. 1 second. Are we talking within this generation, people don't change? I was asking.
In all generations.
Oh.
Humans don't change.
I'm going to suggest that we're going to hope for more. We're hoping that humans do change, just because, as we said at the beginning, we're on a trajectory. We're heading towards Mashiach. Does that mean we're getting better? I wish the answer is definitely yes. And probably a little bit more complicated than that. Let's just say it that way. It isn't always black and white. I will say that today's day and age, you can be traveling on a plane on a holiday, and you will not be surprised if the stewardess makes an announcement saying we are collecting charity for poor people in Africa, and then walk up and down the aisle and expect people to put their hands in their pocket and put change into a bag just because it's charity. And that is fascinating, not so much because people put change in the bag, but because it's so normal for the stewardess to be collecting. Why should an airline representative be collecting money from paying passengers for somebody that not she knows and not you know?
But
it's acceptable.
But they're asking for coinage, which you won't be able to change in your country, but they can give to the people in the country.
It's a great angle, but I must tell you, I am fascinated every single time I see it, and I say, wow, what fantastic world we live in. What a good, I mean, it's not always the case, and you can walk down the street and never give charity. You see many people who sit in the plane and sit around and don't do charity. It's true, but within society today, it's become normal to read in the news that so-and-so has pledged X amount of their estate to charity, which is fascinating. And unfortunately, it's not everybody yet. And there are many people who could share more, but we are seeing is that it's become a big deal to announce charity. And we're going to look at is that although announcing charity is great, and that's monetary charity, you actually find that social media is very often, I think the statistics and how often this is, people, when they have nothing else to post, will go and video themselves doing something. Some people doing something stupid, but often people do something kind, and they'll video themselves or take pictures of themselves doing it so they can get likes and shares and followers who will say, wow, well done. And they'll ask themselves, oh, how many likes have you had? How many thumbs ups have you had for that particular thing? And after you do it, you try to decide, was it a worthwhile sacrifice based on how much feedback you get? So now, of course, it might not be the most altruistic way to do it, but if it's making people do good things, there's definitely some goodness to that. What we want to look at today is ask ourselves, what can I do to help myself want to do more goodness? And also, is there even such a thing as doing kindness just for the sake of kindness? We want to explore what this week's Parshah has to add to that. And of course, the way the Rebbe teaches us is just so beautiful and so gorgeous to see what a Hasidic spin on giving charity looks like. Tzedakah, the way Hasidus teaches tzedakah, is so uplifting, but it's also so doable. It's so within our remit. And what we want to remind ourselves is there's nothing else we take away. If you just zone out now, just to remind ourselves that this week's Parsha, in the middle of all the Yomim Tovim, throws in the mitzvah of tzedakah as we just read it. Thinking about the poor in the middle of our celebrations of Yom Tov, Shofar, Shtei Alechem, Shavuos, Karban Pesach, Lulav and Sukkos, and in the middle of all that, sandwiched in, is the mitzvah of tzedakah. But let's learn it the way the Sikha explains it, because it's gorgeous to see and how the Rebbe builds it up. Let's look at how the Rambam describes this mitzvah in the Code of Jewish Law. What is the law of Leket Shikha and Peah in the law? And the reason we're looking in the Rambam is because he actually codifies it in the book of Halacha, whereas the Shulchan Aruch doesn't deal so much with this. When a person harvests the field, says the Rambam, they should not harvest the entire field. Instead, they should leave a small portion of the standing grain at the end of the field, as the verse says, do not completely remove the grain in the corners of your field when reaping our cedra. This prohibition applies to one who reaps and one who uproots. The grain left standing is referred to as peah. Peah means the corner. Similarly, with regard to leket, when one harvests or binds sheaves, they should not gather the stalks that fall during the harvest. Instead, leave the fallen stalks, Leave them for the poor. As it stated again in our Parshah, you shall not gather the gleanings of your harvest. Similarly, if a person is buying a sheaves of wheat into bundles and forgets one bundle behind, they may not go back and take it. It stays for the poor. So, if we have to ask this in a question format, the question is going to be, why is this unrelated mitzvah of tzedakah sandwiched in between all the mitzvahs of Yom Tov? And if we can rephrase that, we're going to ask the question, what are we supposed to learn from the fact that this mitzvah is sandwiched here in between all the other Yom Tovim that seem to be about how to have a good time and how to be rejoicing and how to be happy? How does this fit in? Now, in order to answer this question, we're going to go back to what is the unrelated mitzvah doing here, and we're going to see that actually Rashi right away mentions something that should help us understand. That's how obvious this question is. Says Rashi, quote, "V'amar Rav Dimi ber Rav Yosef." Rav Dimi taught in the name of Rav Yosef that to replace the mitzvah of leket shechampeah in the middle of a discussion of temple services to teach that fulfilling these mitzvahs properly is equivalent to building the temple and offering sacrifices. Note the word properly and building the temple and offering sacrifices. Fascinating correlation, says Rav Dimi, this is in the son of Yosef, that taught in the name of Yosef, that this mitzvah is here to tell us how powerful the mitzvah of tzedakah is. When done properly, are equivalent to building the temple and offering sacrifices inside. It's a beautiful medrash that says similar kind of thing in a story format. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was traveling from Jerusalem together with Rabbi Yeshua when they passed the ruins of the temple. Rabbi Yeshua said, "Woe unto us! The place where Israel's sins are forgiven is now destroyed. How can we attain forgiveness now that our Beis Hamikdash lays in ruins?" Rabbi Yeshua says, Rabbi Yochanan back to Yeshua, "Worry not, my son," said Rabbi Yochanan. "There is a similar source of forgiveness. What are those? Gemilas chasadim. Acts of kindness will also bring forgiveness." And there you have it, that the Gemilas chasadim is the substitute for the sacrifices in the temple. And the way Rashi has quoted Rav Dimi, the son of Rav Yosef, is by saying that the reason why this week's Parshah has the mitzvah of leket shechampeah sandwiched in is to teach us this very idea, the power of tzedakah. I remember going to a shir, and they were discussing what happens when you know that somebody should really give tzedakah, give charity, and you're afraid to tell them. Let's say somebody needs to raise money for an important project, and they know that so-and-so would benefit tremendously from being a part of that project, but they're just embarrassed to bring it up. So the Rav who was giving the shir was saying, imagine if it was you, and you had the means to be able to sponsor or dedicate this particular mitzvah, and you would love the opportunity to be involved in this mitzvah. More than that, the brachas, the blessings that are drawn down when someone gives charity are enormous. So instead of thinking whether I'm taking wasting someone's money and I'm applying to something, just remind myself that the opportunity of giving tzedakah is for real a tremendous opportunity. It really is. It's not just some sort of selling point. This is what tzedakah is. Tzedakah is a replacement, a substitute, an equivalent to bringing an offering in the temple. Now, if you have an opportunity for somebody to be able to do that, and they have the ability, the means to be able to jump in, and they'd even be happy to do that, don't hold back. Don't refrain from allowing others to enjoy this amazing opportunity. This is what tzedakah is. And in this week's Sedra, it's highlighted together with the Yom Tovim Karbanos to teach us how powerful tzedakah is. Okay. This is the background of where we want to go in today's share. We have a question. What's this leket shechampeah doing in our Parshah? We have an answer. It's teaching us the power of tzedakah. The substitute for karbanos is charity. However, this is where the Sikha says, hold on 1 second. Is this what we know? If I ask you before we learn anything today, what is the number one substitute for offerings of the Beis Hamikdash in today's day and age? What do we generally do today? Because we can't bring karbanis. Anyone?
Davening.
Oh, there are 3 prayers a day, 3 tefillahs a day. We daven every day, and they are set up to correspond to the karbanis in the Beis Hamikdash. Not only that, on Yom Tov, and each of those days of Yom Tov, we have an additional davening. Why? To match, to be a substitute for the additional karbanis. Here's the quote straight from the Gemara in Brachas. Rabbi Shua ben Levi said, the prayers were instituted based on the offering, sacrifice in the Holy Temple. It was taught in the Bryce in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Why made the morning prayer be recited only until noon? Because daily morning prayer offerings may be sacrificed until noon. Why may the afternoon prayer be recited until the evening? Because the daily afternoon offerings in the karbanis and the Beis Hamikdash were brought until the evening. And why did they say the evening prayer is not fixed? Because the burning of the limbs and fats of the offerings that were not consumed by the fire on the altar did not occur until the evening, and they remained on the altar when the offer continues throughout the entire night, and therefore you could pray evening prayers all night. Not only is it there, the connection, it actually matches the time frames. Why did Rabbi say additional prayers and we recited all day? You carbon musaf, you could say all day, because additional offerings is brought throughout the entire day. What better proof do we need that we already have a substitute for the offerings of the Beis Hamikdash, and it's called prayer? So how are we inventing this new substitute, which is based on a story in a Medrash? It's a great source. And it would explain away, as Rashi says, the difficulty we have in this week's Parshah of what are we learning from learning the mitzvah of tzedakah in the middle of the Yomim Tovim Karbanos, but how does it match? Why is kind of specific tzedakah considered equivalent to temple services? Don't we have a different substitute? So really, you can break this question down into 2. One question is the question we're focusing on, which is, why are we saying it's tzedakah? Don't we know it to be davening? Or we can rephrase it, and actually, davening seems to be a better substitute. What makes tzedakah even a substitute for karbanis? What's the similarity? Why should tzedakah of all mitzvahs be the substitute? Perhaps it's maybe keeping Shabbos. Perhaps Shabbos is a better substitute. Perhaps maybe fasting on Yom Kippur is the substitute. Or you want to do something daily, maybe it's, I don't know, eating kosher. How did it become that the giving of charity is the mitzvah that represents, substitutes all those fantastic offerings that were brought in the Beis Hamikdash every day, especially on the Yom Tovim? Somehow we need to understand what charity does, what karbanis offerings in the temple do, and then we'll appreciate why one is a substitute for the other and how that's supposed to work. And when we do that, we'll understand how the Parshah is. Now, it's interesting that we also have to somehow explain where davening fits into all this. I'm just going to do mute all. If anyone wants to unmute yourself at any time, please do so. It's Alt-A on your keyboard or *6 on the phone. So we're up to where we have our questions lined up. We know that our Parshah deals mainly with Yom Tovs, Jewish festivals. We know that in the middle of the Parshah, squeezed in the middle of nowhere almost, there is a reminder of the mitzvah of charity. Charity specifically, in this case, the agricultural charity when we leave behind wheat and harvest for the poor. And we're trying to figure out why is it there. Our initial answer Rashi gave us is to tell us the power of charity, that it substitutes and it's equal to karbanis, offerings brought in the Beis Hamikdash on an altar. And we're asking, isn't davening the real substitute? Why are we suggesting that charity is the new substitute for karbanis, for offerings in the Beis Hamikdash? And of course, we're asking these questions because the answer's got a practical, relevant life message for us today, which we want to explore and find and discover so that we can apply it to our personal life. And here's where we go. So in order to answer our questions, we start off with a quote from Nachmanides, the Ramban. The Ramban, fascinating idea about why did Hashem establish the mitzvah of bringing an animal onto the altar as part of forgiveness process. Why would Hashem want us to take an animal and slaughter it and bring it up on the altar? Says the Ramban, there's a tremendous emotional journey which we human beings can't do in our mind. We have to witness it and live through it, and then the effects take place. This is the power of a carbon. So let's see it inside. Human function is executed through the vehicle of thought, speech, and action. As such, God commanded that when a person sins and brings an offering that's for forgiveness, they should lay their hands physically upon the animal, mirroring the evil action with their hands. Then they verbally, speech, confess, mirroring the evil speech, and then the animal's innards and kidneys of them burnt in a fire, mirroring those limbs in the human body that are known to be instruments of thought and desire in the human being. The animal's legs are burnt, mirroring the sinner's hands and feet that did all the work. The animal's blood is then sprinkled upon the altar, which is analogous to the blood in the sinner's body. All of these acts are performed so that the person should realize that they have sinned against Hashem with their body and soul. And when I experience that, really it should be their own blood getting spilled and their own body burnt, were it not for the love and kindness of the Creator who took a substitute and a ransom, named these offerings, the animal's blood in place of the sinner's blood, its life in place of the sinner's life, and the chief limbs of the offering in place of the chief body and parts of the sinner's body. And he goes on to say, these are worthy words that appeal to the heart, as the words of Agadah. The Ramban wants us to realize that that karbanos, offerings of an animal in the temple, are there to do something. They are supposed to take us on a journey. What sort of journey? A journey in where we think, talk, and do repetitive measures. We do things that will not only demonstrate, but will help us travel to a place of regret, remorse, and more importantly, of strong commitment to do better going forward. How does that happen? Because we take something that belongs to us and watch it change and think about how it could have been and maybe should have been myself, and therefore appreciate how kind it is of Hashem to give me opportunity to change and then grab that opportunity. What's unique about a karbanos in this context is that it's not just an act. It's not just we do something. There's an investment in that journey. And charity, more so than most other mitzvahs, has a similar type of personal investment that makes it happen. How so? Where do we see in charity that sort of investment? So we have here on the next slide, which is a quote from the Alter Rebbe that describes how charity stands out more than any other mitzvah. You know what? I'm taking it off the slide. Anyone want to guess? What's the Alter Rebbe going to tell us about charity that makes it stand out with personal investment more so than any other mitzvah? Unique for charity. Anybody, help me out.
Is it because you've earned that money and you've put your soul and energy and effort into that? And I think he does say that it's more so for men parting with the money, but I won't mention that. And then, over, and giving that, sharing from your exerted efforts, especially the soul. Yeah.
Correct. So the idea that money, which is hard-earned money, with our own sweat, or efforts, we've earned that money, and to give that money away, says the Alter Rebbe, is giving away an investment. And the Alter Rebbe goes further and says, what happens if someone didn't earn their money? They just got their money. Still.
I just wanted to say that even if it's not earned, if it was inherited, let's say, then you could use it for all these things. You could use it for your thoughts, speech, and action. You could use it to have a nice holiday or to whatever, have something nice to eat, etc., etc.
Absolutely, or to buy yourself something nice to wear. And that's exactly the point. I think most people say, why would I give away my money? My money is mine. What does that mean? My money is mine means that whatever I want to acquire in this world, the money is the tool to get that. So even if I didn't earn the money with hard work, but the money that I'm giving away to charity, especially if I don't have loads, but even if I do have loads, is money that I could have spent on me. And by giving it away, I can no longer spend it on me. I just watched this with my children, where they have their savings, whatever they have, and they decided to give away money to charity. And then all of a sudden, the realization that when they give it away, they won't have it anymore. And although they have X amount of money now, which they can get this, that, and the other for, but when they give it away to charity, they will no longer have that money for themselves. And just watching them work through that emotion, it's just fascinating. And then when they decide to give it on anyhow, it's just such nachas. It's just amazing. But that's what charity is. Charity isn't give away the money and you'll still have it. Charity is that I give it away. It happens to be that Hashem rewards charity and he says, test me, you'll see it, it'll come back to you. That's not why we give it. We give it away and we expect it to be given. And charity is exactly that. It takes a lot of investment to give away money that's mine. And that's what my money is. My money is mine. It's mine for me. And all of a sudden, charity, we give it away. Says the Alter Rebbe, that sort of investment, where you're giving away either your hard-earned money, but either way, money that was about to become your flesh and blood, your pleasure, your enjoyment, and now you've given it away. Wow. Wow. This is charity, giving it away. And this is comparative to an offering. This is comparative to a carbon. Says the Rebbe, the comparison of gifts to the poor to offerings of sacrifice is obvious. When a person offers a sacrifice, they give something of themselves to God. The same thing occurs when donating gifts to the poor. The donor gives away their possessions to another person by God's command, and thereby they have given a gift to God. Money, hard-earned, stuff that was about to become you and your pleasure, given away. Sacrifices, charity. Sacrifice, a person gives something to themselves to God. Charity has the same idea. The donor gives away their possession to another by God's command. That's how powerful it is. Now, the Sikha takes this whole idea 2 notches up, much deeper. But even if we stop here, what we've learned right now is that in this week's Parshah, Hashem wants us to appreciate just how powerful charity is. And therefore, in the middle of the whole paragraphs upon paragraphs, the chapter that deals with Karbonis, sacrifices to do with Yomim Tovim, the highlights of the year, throws it in. You want to know what's a substitute for Karbonis? What's on par? What's comparative? Charity. Personal investment, giving away that could have been yours and making it benefit somebody else. Great. Fantastic. And this idea is just Parshas Emor. It's so fitting for the Emor, self-refinement, character improvement, which is what the Sfiras HaEmor is all about. But let's not stop here. Let's push the bar and explore even deeper of this idea of tzedakah and how it relates to Korbanis and why this becomes the mitzvah that's sandwiched in amongst this week's parasha. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to look at one of the offerings that were brought in the Beis Hamikdash, that brought in the temple, that was considered a superior offering. Which mitzvah, which carbon was considered a superior carbon? Anyone know? And the truth is, I wouldn't have guessed this myself, I think. But when I saw the Sikha, I realized that I've learned this before. And you'll probably say the same thing. Oh, I've heard this before. But we're going to say it. The Sikha quotes from Rambam that talks about the Karban Eitzim, the wooden offering. Now, this is not a wooden cow instead of a real cow. And it's not a wooden whatever. It's pieces of wood, firewood, that were brought into the Beis Hamikdash as a gift to be able to keep the fire on the altar burning. Think about it. The bonfire on the altar was never allowed to be extinguished ever. It had to burn continuously. And that requires fuel. And the fuel had to be very particular. It had to be wood that was clean, fresh wood, couldn't be wormy wood. And the wood was very particular. But this carbonates in this wood sacrifice, certain families had a fixed time in which they would go out to the forest and bring wood for the pile and the altar. On the day designated for each particular family to bring the wood sacrifice, they would also bring voluntary burnt off animal sacrifices. This occasion was called the Day of the Wood Sacrifice. Korban ha'etzim. And it was celebrated as a festival for the family bringing the wood on this day. The family was forbidden to deliver mournful eulogies for the deceased or fast. They were also not allowed to perform work on this day. This was the custom. Even a private individual who donated wood or logs for the pile on the altar was forbidden to deliver the mournful eulogies of the deceased or fast on that day. And they were also not allowed to perform work on this day. This was the custom that you turned the day that you brought korban ha'etzim, wood offerings, to the Beis Hamikdash into your own mini Yom Tov. It was a special day because it was a special korban. And of course, the question we're asking is, why does the wood's offering deserve the status of a superior offering? What's so special about the korban ha'etzim? Now, the way we've just described korbanos, offerings, and said that charity has this unique element, that korbanos are about the journey of a person who witnesses and sees how powerful the korban is, and you touch and feel and think and speak about this journey that the animal is making that should have been me. It's lost on the wood. The wood is such a low-key gift. One of the two of the fascinating fun facts are, the wood gift didn't necessarily mean that your wood got burnt. If I decided to donate wood on the altar, they used it if they needed it. And if they didn't, they didn't. More importantly, the wood offering, there was no emotional journey in watching the wood get burnt. You had no idea. You weren't even around necessarily. And here's text 10. Text 10 teaches us that although there are gifts that are much more glamorous than the gift of the gift of wood carries superiority because exactly this, because it's not glamorous, because it doesn't make headlines, and there's nothing to write home, so to speak. There's no splash about it. This Gemara, this Midrash, describes the story of King Agrippas, who wanted to give 1,000 oila offerings, one a day. And he made a stipulation, nobody else should be allowed to bring any offerings until I'm finished my 1,000 offerings. Oh, what a big korban. What a fantastic gift to Hashem, 1,000 offerings. And then a poor man comes into the Beis Hamikdash and he says, I have 4 little birds. I want to give 2 to Hashem because I recognize that the only reason I have the other 2 is because Hashem. So the Kohen says to him, I'm sorry, I can't take any offerings right now because King Agrippas has said that until he finishes, nobody is to bring any korbanos. Says the poor man to the Kohen, I am afraid that if I don't bring these to Hashem, I'll be left with nothing for myself. Please, have mercy. Allow me to thank Hashem for the bit of food that I do have. The Kohen realizes that this is a poor man. What can he do? So he lets the poor man bring offerings. To the Kohen's poor mazel, King Agrippas has a dream. And in his dream, he hears that the poor man's 2 offerings are more precious to Hashem than the 1,000 offerings from a King Agrippas. And King Agrippas quickly sends a message to the Kohen. Excuse me, what's going on here? Has someone else brought an offering? What am I dreaming about? And the Kohen says, yes. This poor man came to town and he was begging for mercy so that he can thank Hashem for his little bit of food that he has. We had no choice but to offer it. King Agrippas was amazed. This poor man, with his 2 meager offerings, is worth more than his 1,000 offerings because he gave it with his heart. It didn't have half the splash and glamour. It didn't make the headlines, and there was not much to post on his Instagram or Facebook. King Agrippas had plenty. But the poor man's precious korban, that was dear to Hashem. And of course, what this teaches is that although korbanos are very important, giving a gift to Hashem is really important, the gift to Hashem is supposed to be us drawing closer to Hashem. But there's a big danger in that, and that is ego. The ego can steal the closeness between me and Hashem that the korban, the offering, is set to bring. The offering is brought. But if I am out for lunch, if I've taken a walk and I've allowed my ego to become in between myself and Hashem, that kindness is taken away. And therefore the closeness isn't achieved from a korban. Compare that to the poor man's offering that had no ego to it because there wasn't much to be proud of. But that's exactly where the closeness was achieved. And in a sense, this is the advantage of the wood offering that becomes superior and we turn it into a festival. No eulogies, no fasting, no work to be done. It's a day of focus because it's not got that big splash. And here's the sikha, the actual wood donated to the temple was not a sacrifice. Or there's a necessary element for the fire that burnt on the altar, which in turn consumed the sacrifices. The actual sacrifices that burnt on the wood were not property of the wood donor. Rather, they were property of the entire Jewish people. And this was what makes it special. There's an even greater observation to point out that this donation was performed with great joy, so much so that on the day that each family donated, then considered a holiday, there was no ego and all joy. There was no headlines, but there was festivity, excitement about Hashem. This combination is the superior offering we're looking for. Eagle's giving. And this is the greatest level of sacrifice. Amazing. In this sort of idea, when we appreciate not just in general what sacrifices are, but by looking at the super sacrifice and realizing what the job of a sacrifice is, not just to give Hashem a gift, but to lose ourselves in that. Not to find ourselves in that, but to invest myself, leave behind the ego, and find joy in that Hashem is getting a gift, rather than I'll have something to write home about. This is the type of korban which is special. Fascinating read from the Tzemach Tzedek. My great-grandfather Tzemach Tzedek asked, what is the purpose of Chassidus? Says the Friedrich Rebbe. Now, my great-grandfather didn't ask, what is Chassidus? That he was obviously knew. He knew what Chassidus is. It's a godly wisdom, and it's the inner workings of Torah. Rather, his question was, what is the purpose of Chassidus? What do you think the answer is? The Alter Rebbe answered the Tzemach Tzedek, the entire purpose of Chassidus is to mashana zayin tivius midosav, to change a person's character. That is the purpose of Chassidus. Think about it. There are thousands of deep, complicated, holy pages of work. And what's the purpose of it all? Of discovering, exploring, learning, studying, analyzing, talking, discussing, all about Hashem. What is the purpose? Become a better person. Become a changed character. Person's first order of work is with the eye, to make an honest assessment of who they are and what they are. Who am I? The correct answer is, I am a godly soul, a share of God himself. I am literally godliness. Thereafter, person must know who exactly this I is in order to really break that I, namely those matters of the ego, is consumed with and what the ego wants. And this particular program of introspection is akin to plowing. It burrows into the heart and breaks through the stone-like coldness of the heart. It creates the possibility to thereafter plant seeds of work, so the person is finally able to plant good and healthy seeds. And this is what Chassidus is out to do. Karbonis, drawing closer to Hashem, with Kai being honest, and being willing to put myself aside and leave the ego aside as well. Amazing. Says Rambam, this is what Karbonis did. The greatest level, higher than all the rest, is to fortify a fellow Jew and give him a gift or a loan, form a partnership with him, or find work for him until he is strong enough so that he does not need to ask for other sustenance. What is the highest form of charity, says the Rambam? The highest form of charity. First, the Rambam says the highest form of charity is to give to people you don't know who they are. You don't see them. Give it to organizations that deliver. Might be my next door neighbor. I will have no idea. And they don't know who donated. But there's a higher level still. Higher even than giving blind charity. What is that? What's the saying? Give a man a fish, you fed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, you fed him for life. This idea of giving somebody an opportunity, a job, a loan, a chance, a step up. Of this it is said, if your kinsman being in straits comes under your authority and you hold him as though a resident alien, let him live by your side. That is as if to say, hold him up so they don't fall and be in need. Don't wait until he needs charity. Help him out beforehand. Help him out so that he doesn't have to need charity, so that he can get a job and should get rolling. And this is Gemilus Chasadim, kindness. Providing the receiver with independence rather than assistance. Providing the giver the opportunity to foster and cultivate kindness. Gemilus Chasadim is chesed for both. The quote we missed out here was David HaMelech asking Hashem, why do we need kindness? Gemilus Chasadim. We want to focus on this. The Rebbe is going to point out that of all the different types of charity that the Torah chooses to put into this week's Parshah is a very particular type of charity. A charity that doesn't have the giver's name splashed over a building, doesn't have his name or her name in the newspapers or even in social media, because the mitzvah of leket shikcham peah, of the forgotten stalks and the corn of the field, are not even a choice that we get. And they're often the stuff that we don't even realize we're giving away. Leket and shikha is the things that we've forgotten behind. You can't arrange to forget things. And it's not forgotten, unless you buy us. But this sort of idea, charity and kindness without ego, this is what makes this parsha take. Being able to do something because this is what Hashem wants. Hashem has designed his world in such a way that there should always be givers and receivers. And even the receiver has something to give. And even the giver has to be a receiver somewhere. And this opportunity to become close to Hashem is for the sake of exactly that, becoming close to Hashem. So what we're learning in this week's Parsha is, not only do we have the power of charity in general, but we have the power of charity that can be given without headlines, without the ego, is even more powerful, because there's nothing siphoning off that closeness to Hashem. And that's what brings this mitzvah into this week's Parsha. So why is kindness specifically tzedakah considered equivalent to the temple services? The answer is because it's like building the Beis Hamikdash. It's allowing for goodness to happen without having to make it big, without having to be in the headlines. And of course, the message is as powerful as ever. In this week's Parashah, we learn that we have to celebrate, we have to educate our children, we learn that we have to give charity, but we learn something deeper still. Selfless giving is focused on the receiver. Selfless giving is thinking about what does the receiver need in order to benefit. And when we can think about the receiver, that is a way of thinking of Hashem. Selfless giving doesn't have to have Kodak moments or Instagram moments or storylines for your Facebook page. It's still a mitzvah tzedakah. It's a more powerful mitzvah tzedakah. It's not to say that if someone gave charity and made it headlines, there's no value in that. There's tremendous value. But in this week's parsha, leket shikcham peah, we learn to push the bar. And that's the properly that we spoke about. That when we're able to do the mitzvah of charity properly, that's the substitute for karbanis. So we've learned a powerful message in this week's Sefer. It ties into character improvement, which is what the Sphere Soima is, but is a practical way of doing it. Not just about how much money we're giving, but being able to focus on what the receiver needs, which is what the purpose of charity is. This is why Hashem designed the world this way. And when we can do that, we are assured that this is like a carbon, a gift to Hashem. Hashem loves it and appreciates it, and Hashem loves us too. We learned something. I wish you all a wonderful week, a uplifted week, a charitable week, whether it's giving or receiving, and whether it's receiving and giving in someone else, we should have the ability to not so much think about ourselves, but think about who else is in this partnership. And with that, we'll have the brachas from Hashem. And of course, we want to say and mention a major shout out to someone else who gives Michal, who sponsored the lessons of this week, of this week's Parshah, and in general for this month. We wish them all and their family lots of bracha and mazel. Thank you for joining. Wish you all a wonderful week, a great Shabbos, and of course, Pesach Sheni. Don't miss out the second chance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.